Evening, everyone, and welcome to everyone again. I hope you're all well and ready to join in again with us as we travel towards Holy Week. In the last session, we began to think about our faith in terms of imagination and looking at imaginative faith pictures. So tonight, in this next session, we start to identify one or more characters from the Bible who inspire us or encourage us, or whose story is similar to our own, or why we chose them. You know, novelists and filmmakers often use different characters to tell the same story from a different point of view. And our faith pictures tell people something of our own stories. But in all of this, they can be supported by us, thinking of a Bible character we particularly relate to. The Bible is full of characters who meet with God or Jesus in very different ways. And like us, their backgrounds, temperaments, and life experiences are very rich and varied. They share similar doubts and fears to us. They experience ecstatic faith and quiet trust, as well as sullen defiance and angry doubt. They too have a wide range of faith stories. Some are heartwarming and inspiring, and others are shocking and violent. And between these extremes, we find a huge cast of colourful and varied characters. So I'm now going to ask Janet, Karen and Kevin which characters in the Bible are their favourites and what they mean so much and how they mean so much to them. First, one of my favourite characters in the Bible is Peter. Peter was a disciple. He liked to make promises and he wanted to be Jesus's favourite. The possibility of adventure and something that Peter liked and rather cherished. The episode of the stormy sea and the fishing boat that felt like it was tipping over. Jesus appeared to leave his boat and started to walk on the water. Peter thought it was amazing, and Jesus encouraged him to walk on the water too. But as you know, Peter did not just walk on the water. When he started to feel afraid, he actually started to sink. Jesus had to rescue him. Peter would learn that he would need to be forgiven by Jesus many, many times. And when Jesus was betrayed and taken away to be killed, Peter ran away. Peter seemed to make a mess of so many things. But when Jesus rose from the dead and wanted the disciples to understand his plan for the future, Jesus wanted to speak to Peter. Maybe Peter thought he would be in trouble. He couldn't blame Jesus for being ashamed of him. Jesus surprised Peter and told him that he would build the church using him. He wanted Peter to be a leader and he wanted Peter to follow him once more. Jesus had forgiven Peter for things that usually end friendship, and he told Peter that his future plans included him. When you make the choice to follow Jesus, you will not get 100% straight away from him. Making good choices can take time. It will always take God's help, and he will help. And in the end, Peter became the rock, the foundation on which the church was built. Peter was given the keys to the kingdom. And what I like and love about Peter is that for all his failings, God had a plan. Peter just had failings like the rest of us. Peter didn't know what the plan was, just as none of us know what the plan is. In the end, Peter made it. Peter got the top job. So that's one of my favourite characters in the Bible. Janet, do you want to go and see who you've chosen?
Perhaps there are those that know me already know who I'll probably choose. He is my absolute favourite, and an unusual one. Thomas. Thomas, who has had a dreadful reputation for the last 2,000 years, and might I say, in my opinion, not earned and not deserved. Thomas is the one who wasn't actually with the disciples when Jesus first appeared to them after his resurrection. But Thomas was there when Jesus came back. And I often wonder, did he come back specifically because Thomas was there? And Thomas asked to see Christ's wounds. So Jesus, obliged. He said, see my hands, touch them. See my side, put your hand in it. And then Thomas said something so profound that no one else in the Bible had uttered before him or after him. My Lord and my God. Yes, everyone before had said he was the Messiah, the anointed king, but no one dared to say Jesus was God. And Thomas wasn't just here at this particular point. Thomas tends to, in the Gospel of John, be right at the pivotal moment when Jesus wants to say something profound. When Lazarus died and Jesus was waiting, before they left, he explained that Lazarus had fallen asleep. And of course, the dim disciples said, well, don't worry about it, Lord. Once he's had a sleep, he'll be fine. But what Christ meant was Lazarus was dead. And that's what he had to explain blatantly and bluntly to them. Lazarus is dead. And Thomas knew that if Christ went back and did this, there would be trouble. But what did Thomas say? Thomas said, let us go with him, that we may die with him. Thomas was willing to die for Jesus. There was no doubt about that. And then in one of the most best loved readings at funerals, it was Thomas that prompted the most profound thing that Jesus said again. Thomas said, Jesus said, and I go to prepare a place for you. I will come again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How can we know the way? And Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Another profound statement from Jesus, prompted by Thomas. And Thomas is a man after my own heart. Show me. Let me see. But there's something, if you want to delve into the scriptures, that might explain Thomas not doubting, but questioning the disciples. Not doubting Jesus, but questioning the disciples. In Matthew 24, verse 26, Jesus states there will be false messiahs, false prophets will appear. Look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. I think Thomas had a flipping good memory. And that was called to mind when the disciples said, we have seen Christ. I don't think Thomas ever doubted Christ. Or he did doubt his dim brothers and sisters on the odd occasion. Thomas is my man. And it's through Thomas that my faith came alive. Because when I was read those words, my Lord and my God, just like John Wesley, my heart didn't just warm, it leapt, that I knew that Christ was my Saviour. Thanks to Thomas.
Thank you, Janet. I love it when you talk about Thomas. Oh dear. Karen.
I must be the only one that defends him.
You do so well. So well. Oh dear. Karen, who have you got for us?
Yeah, well, I couldn't narrow it down to one, so I've got a few. So I'll say a little bit about a few. I mean, firstly, one that goes for all of us clearly is Jesus of Nazareth. You know, he's got to be number one. And at the moment, I'm reading a book called Alongside by Henry Martin. It's my Lent book, and it talks about Jesus's struggles and how he can be alongside us in our struggles. So, you know, I had to include Jesus because I'm absolutely loving this book, and it's opening my eyes to fresh insights. So yeah, Jesus first. Beyond that, first one, Mary Magdalene. And I particularly love the story in John 20, Mary and Jesus in the Garden of Resurrection. And it's particularly, you know, the most touching bit is the point where Mary hears her name. And that story relates very much to an overwhelming religious experience I had about 18 years ago, the likes of which I'd never had before, and the likes of which I've never had since, when I was called forth out of my sorrow and surprised by joy, as the phrase goes. And it was an experience that changed my life. And eventually, it led me along the path of ordination. Now, I particularly love that story, and the best picture I have of it is this one. Now, story attached to this is when we were in France, I saw a signpost that said Chapel de la Madeleine. Madeleine is French for Magdalene. And I just wanted to go there. And we followed the signs down country lane after country lane after country lane, and eventually in the middle of nowhere found the Chapel of La Madeleine. And it was a 15th century chapel. And each window, there were 6 windows, each stained glass window was dedicated to a scene in the life of Mary Magdalene. And this one is the Garden of Resurrection. You can see there are no clearly defined images, there are no faces, there are no hands. It's simply colour. And Mary is here in blue, and this is her risen Lord, and the light from Jesus illuminating Mary. So Mary Magdalene has to be the first one I wanted to speak about. The second one is another Mary, the mother of our Lord. We always had a little statue of Mary at home when I was a little girl. But when I was a teenager and young woman in my 20s, I think I heard too many sermons and talks about the meekness and the obedience of Mary, and it didn't really resonate with me at all. And then I came across a book, Truly Our Sister, by Elizabeth Johnson. Now, Elizabeth Johnson is a Jesuit and she's a professor of theology, and she looks at Mary from a feminist point of view. And when I read that book, it just opened my eyes and I began to see Mary in a different light. Mary is a disciple and Mary is a prophet. And the story that particularly relates to my understanding of Mary as a prophet is the visitation, when she goes out to visit cousin Elizabeth, and the 2 women absolutely rejoice in the action of God in their lives. And as a response, Mary belts out the Magnificat. Now, I used to sing the Magnificat when I was a little girl in church at evensong, and I didn't realise, but it's absolute dynamite. It's dynamite. I mean, Dietrich Bonhoeffer said of the Magnificat, it's the most passionate, the wildest, one might say the most revolutionary Advent hymn ever sung. And Mary is singing out about on behalf of the poor and the oppressed in much the same way that Hannah did in the Old Testament. And it's an absolutely marvellous, marvellous song. I love it. And I think particularly the prophetic voice, whether it's coming from the Old Testament prophets or Mary or our own or the church's prophetic voice, is really important in my faith. So, two Marys. In addition to that, Ruth and Naomi, I absolutely love that story, the solidarity. Judith's smiling, I think I'm taking some of yours, Judith. You know, the solidarity between those two women is absolutely fantastic. And then the unnamed women, the women at the well, the woman with the issue of blood, the Syrophoenician woman, all unnamed, but I think they stand for all of us. They don't have a name, but they stand for all of us. And I haven't included any men, so I'm going to have one to finish with, and that's Abraham. And I absolutely love Genesis, and I love the story of God's promise to Abraham, when God takes him out and says, if you're able to, count the stars. And I don't think we fully appreciate that. When my son spent a year in Australia working on a ranch, he was in near Alice Springs. The first neighbours were 2 hours away. They had a generator that shut down at 10 o'clock at night. And then it was black, absolutely no light, unless you had a torch. And apparently, well, Sam said, you've never seen stars. Until you've seen what he saw in the blackness of the night, you've never seen stars. So I can imagine Abraham being asked to count the stars, and they're absolutely glorious. And the way I love the telling of that story is the way it's done in godly play. And I'll just read one sentence. Godly play is a way that you tell the story to children, using a big sandbag and some little models, little wooden models. Sometimes Abraham would go to the edge of the desert and look out across the sand and into the sky. Then God came so close to Abraham, and Abraham came so close to God that he knew what God wanted him to do. And when you're telling that story to kids and you're putting your hands around the little figure of Abraham and you're saying God came so close to Abraham and Abraham came so close to God, they just get it. You don't have to explain religious experience in any other way. You can tell from their eyes. They just get it. And I think that there's something beyond words. You know, we tried to use images, we've tried to use an object, we've tried to use a faith picture to talk about our faith. But in the end, there's something that's beyond words, and it's just in here. Okay.
Thank you, Karen. I'm not disappointed. Kevin.
Yes.
What have you got for us tonight?
Okay. My favorite character is really as a result of his experience, I think. And that is a character from the Gospel of Luke. And it's a man who lived in the city of Jericho, and his name was Zacchaeus. Now, if you went to school to Sunday school as a child, you'd have heard all about Zacchaeus because he's one of those people who was a wrong one who went right, and therefore seen as a bit of an example. But actually, there's more about him, I think, than meets the eye. Zacchaeus, he was, according to Luke, a chief tax collector and rich. Now, the role of a tax collector was someone who was employed by the Romans. And the tax collector, of course, by very nature, collected tax. They were not popular because their role was to basically prop up the existing political and powerful machinery, the oppressor, if you like. the Roman occupiers. And so Zacchaeus was seen as a collaborator with the occupying power. And tax collectors had a very poor reputation because they were seen as being those who defrauded the people. Now, there is some truth in that, certainly. However, there's a bit more to it than that. And that is that if you were a tax collector, the Roman authorities would have basically said, look, each day you have to collect X amount of money. That's what we expect from you. How you do it, up to you. If you don't do it, then you're for the chop, mate. So therefore, if it was a bit of a quiet day, they would struggle to make their quota of money. And so what they would do is that on good days, they would then charge in tax from the people a little bit extra. So as far as the person, who was paying up was concerned, these people were a bunch of thieves because they were taking more than they should. Now, the thing is, though, is that it wasn't as clear cut as all of that as well, because not only did the tax collector themselves have to take more than perhaps they were entitled to, chief tax collectors were like their bosses. They were the foremen, if you like, forewomen, or men in this case. And so they would have their cut to take as well. So they became very wealthy, and that they would make sure that the people working under them were the ones who were collecting the right amount. So they kind of cracked the whip. Now, Jericho was an important place and had been for millennia. And it was a place that people passed through as they went up and down the Jordan Valley. Because if you wanted to go from, say, Galilee to Jerusalem, you either had to go down the Jordan Valley through places like Jericho and then the long climb up the hill to the Mount of Olives and then down into the city of Jerusalem, which is the route that Jesus and his disciples were taking on their way to Jerusalem for that fateful Passover. And so it was a major thoroughfare. And because the Romans were investing in roads and stuff like that, they wanted to make sure that it was paid for, and most importantly, paid for by somebody else, the locals. So anyway, so Zacchaeus, he's the man. He is not just the nasty guy who takes too much money. He is the boss of the nasty guys who take too much money. So a bit of a kind of a godfather figure in some respects. I don't think he exactly made people an offer they couldn't refuse, but his job was still nonetheless to be the one who cracked the whip over the other tax collectors and to enforce the policy of the Romans. Now, the thing is that people didn't like him, but he still wanted to play a part in public life. And he'd heard that Jesus was passing through. And of course, as we know, he couldn't see Jesus because he was a bit on the short side. And so it says he ran on ahead and he climbed up a sycamore tree to see him. And when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for I must stay at your house today. And of course, Zacchaeus gets down and people are shocked. Yeah, if Jesus was any kind of prophet, he'd know this kind of person. He would know he was a wrong un. He would know not only that was he a thief, but he was the prince of thieves, and not like Robin Hood in a good way. So Zacchaeus, therefore, was seen as something of a surprise choice as far as the people were concerned for home catering for Jesus. But the thing was, you see, is that discussion, that word from Jesus, was the spark, the catalyst for a whole new way of being. Because he suddenly realized that he was actually worthy of having somebody come and see him, to actually have somebody come and speak with him, and someone who would do something quite radical, which is to sit and eat with him. And so as a response, he really did have a conversion experience. And he said, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will restore it fourfold. So in other words, he'd give back 4 times over the odds of anything being taken fraudulently. And half his possessions he was giving to the poor. Quite a remarkable change of life, because this is a guy who depended upon the whole thing of being financially secure and safe. Now, the reason why I find this is so fascinating a figure, Zacchaeus, is partly because of conversion, but also because he speaks to me, because I haven't always been, the most honest, decent, nice person by any means. For some people, the jury's still out on that one. But the thing is that Zacchaeus was given a second chance, and he took that opportunity. And I think that when we read this story, we can actually see this as a person whose life was transformed because of his encounter with Jesus. And it links to a kind of a bit of a hero of mine, who was not a biblical one, but a 17th century priest and poet called George Herbert, who wrote many poems, but one particular one, which kind of resonates with the Zacchaeus story. Love bade me welcome. And it talks about how, I feel guilty. I feel that I've done things that are wrong. I've marked them, my shame, and so on and so forth. And then love says, you must sit down and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. The invitation didn't come from Jesus to Zacchaeus. It was Jesus. It didn't come from Zacchaeus to Jesus. This was an invitation from Jesus to come and to entertain, to come to Zacchaeus' house. And it was Jesus's initiative. And it shows that in the life of faith, this isn't about us. It's about Jesus, who reaches out to us. So that's my man.
Thank you, Kevin. What fascinates me when you start to look at characters in the Bible, there's always another side to the story, isn't there? I mean, we say about a lot of things, oh, well, there's 2 sides to every story, da-di-da. But when you start to look at the characters in the Bible, all the ones that we've picked, there's always another side, how they've triumphed over evil, or how they've come to see the light of God through either what they've done or they've not done, or how they've behaved or how they've not behaved. And I just think that mystery in itself makes me want to look at every character in the Bible and to see what they bring to us, what their faults were, and I think that's worth a lot. And I think sometimes that does us good as well, because like you said, Kevin, some of the stories you can reflect in your own story, and that's, of course, is why it makes it special to you and to me and to everybody else. So thank you, all of you, for that. According to my watch, we've now got about 2 minutes. So first of all, I'm going to hold up. First of all, does anybody else want to say anything? Or are you saving it for later?
I could save it for later, but just to mention, I think some of these characters resonate with all of us. I saw you smiling, Judith, when I mentioned Ruth and Naomi. And Janet, when you talked about Thomas, I just loved the bit where Thomas says, I have to see for myself. And I think that was an important step in my faith. I was taught a faith, but it came to a point where I just had to see for myself. So I think these characters, they interact with all of us in different ways, don't they?
Yeah, they do, absolutely. Anybody else want to say anything before I put the magic numbers up? Can you see that?
So we're looking at the Zoom number, which is 843 4882 3223. That's 843 4882 3223, and the pass code to get on is 025728. 025728.
Kevin. Thanks to all of you for your input this evening in this first session, and we all look forward to meeting the rest of our group later on today.